now listening to the Film Monsters podcast with Nate and Ray.
Well, hello everyone, and welcome back to Season 2 of the Film Monsters podcast. I'm Nate.
And I am the new and improved Ray.
Yes, we're both the 2.0 versions of ourselves at this point. We've made it 10 episodes into the podcast. Ray and I have had a blast, and we decided to kind of shift the podcast in the direction where we're going to take a more thematic approach. And the theme of this season is going to be science fiction, because Ray and I are sci-fi nerds.
Honestly, I am so excited about it.
Being that this is a sci-fi themed season, and it's a new season and a new episode, I thought it would be fun to talk about a new sci-fi movie that I saw, and I know that you watched, by Mr. David Cronenberg, and that is Crimes of the Future.
Oh, yes.
I finally got around to seeing this movie. Ray, I know you saw it when it got released, and I just want to say, I loved this movie. I didn't just like it, I loved it. I know there's been some mixed reviews about it, and it's kind of been all over the place, but I found this world to just be so immersive and fascinating, and it was like Cronenberg back in his form from the 1980s, and I respected the hell out of him for it.
You know, it's really interesting. I know a lot of people were complaining and saying things about this movie, but so I didn't grow up on Cronenberg. I wasn't a Cronenberg fanatic. I discovered Cronenberg through the Criterion Collection, oddly enough. I really enjoyed his movies. I think they're great. I also think he's really good with other genres. I recently watched A History of Violence, which was incredible. So when I went and saw this movie, I wasn't really expecting. I didn't have any built up expectations. Oh, Cronenberg is back. It was more of okay, yeah, this is a guy that I've seen his films. I've enjoyed him, and I'm excited to see what else he does. And yeah, I think having less expectations made the experience better for me.
Just wanted to say, and I have a YouTube review that by the time this episode comes out will already have been released, so I'll talk about it anyway. One of the things I loved about this movie, and Ray, I'm interested to hear what you think about this, is the whole time I was watching this film, I always feel like David Cronenberg has something bigger that he's trying to say with his movies, even as early as The Brood and Videodrome. There's always this larger commentary at hand. This movie to me, and I read some articles afterwards, and there's a lot of people who agree on this, and I was glad. This movie feels very heavily relevant to the queer and trans experience. I think it's so interesting when the idea of this group who finds out that they can consume synthetic plastics and that they will be able to survive off of using and eating these products that no one else can consume. And they're trying to push to do this thing so that society can kind of shift, and maybe it'll make our world into a better place. And that the government wants to hide this from other people, and these people are being suppressed, and they're treated badly because they're different. And Viggo Mortensen's and Lea Seydoux shift in looking at it through this really almost negative perspective at first, and then kind of transitioning into understanding where they're coming from, and their eyes opening up to this. And I felt like it was so heavy into that. I think obviously with surgery being such a heavy overtone in the film too, and it was just really thought-provoking and moving and beautiful in that element. And for a science fiction film that has some really disturbing moments, I thought that it was really cool that it had that poignant of a message.
It is interesting because I didn't have that takeaway from it, but as you're explaining this, that actually makes a lot of sense.
Another concept that I found so fascinating is this whole idea of people can't really feel pain anymore. And those people that were on the side of the road that were almost portrayed as drug addicts, cutting each other with knives. Cronenberg comes up with these great ideas. This is obviously a dystopian world. You can tell, it's not Mad Max level dystopia, but the buildings all look really decrepit and gross. The color palettes are really disgusting. And this idea of this whole group of people finding an alternative way to live that might have a positive impact on society by using trash essentially to consume and continue on life without wasting more bountiful resources that contribute to our planet. And I thought that was another really fascinating takeaway. And Cronenberg always has really layered films, but that was another thing in this movie that I was like, wow, that's really poignant. It hits really hard.
Yeah, it was a good movie. I had a chance to see it in theaters. It's always really interesting watching movies like this in theaters because, it was so funny watching people walk into this movie, and I think they were expecting some like bloodbath gore movie, and they walked out with this very like cerebral sci-fi body horror movie. And that's the thing, is like I feel like people hear body horror and they think these disgusting gross out moments, and I feel like this movie, though still under the umbrella of body horror, it's definitely more refined than just disgusting transformations. There's definitely something more refined about it than just that. Like, it's actually trying to say something.
And I feel like that's, like I said, Cronenberg's been doing that in his whole career, but I feel like even now, post movies like History of Violence and Crash, and even films like A Dangerous Method that he's made over the past couple years that are more intimate character studies, I feel like the message and the undertones really stick.
Yeah, go watch it. I hope that we get the score on vinyl too, because it was incredible.
We are in the sci-fi season. We did not talk last week about what today's episode is going to be about, and if you're reading the title, you're obviously going to know what it's about. But I'll just pass it over to you, Ray, and let you kind of give people a rundown as to what we're going to be diving into today.
So as we try to transition more into like seasonal approach, we figured we'd break them down, each small season, into 5 episode clusters where we can focus on the topic heavily, and we decided to start this little experiment with sci-fi being a prominent and very important genre in literature and film, even music. There's a lot of bands out there with a very futuristic sci-fi vibe going to it. So I just felt like it would be really cool to kick things off with a genre that not only it's so broad, but it's also so rich in its history. Like, so what is sci-fi to you though? Like, let's just kind of do the layman's like version of what sci-fi means to us.
Yeah, so I feel like science fiction is a really complex genre, and like there's obviously a ton of subgenres amidst science fiction, but I feel like, to me, a lot of people correlate science fiction directly to like alien life form or like contact with the extraterrestrial, and I think that is a big part of science fiction, but I feel like science fiction also is a lot about technology and like society moving forward with technology, how technology affects us. Like, it's not on my list, but take a film like Terminator, for instance. Terminator is a perfect example of science fiction and how the progress of society into a direction that's more technologically thriving will have a negative impact on society as a whole. And so I think there are elements of like this extraterrestrial, otherworldly nature, but there's also something more confined and refined. Like there are a ton of movies that have been released that are more small scale over the past several years about like simple things like robotic teleportation or any of those things. And so science fiction has a really broad definition to me, and I think you'll be really interested with the list I have today about kind of all over the place with what I think science fiction is. So what is science fiction to you, Ray?
Science fiction is a genre that encompasses like so much. Like you were saying, I feel like a lot of people narrow it down to the basics. And yeah, I mean, obviously, you have films, like Star Trek, or even the big ones like 2001: A Space Odyssey, which it's a classic, has totally made some strides to further the genre. Then you even have films as early as 1920s, like silent films like Fritz Lang's Metropolis, where they really kind of jump into the futuristic world, what people saw, the things that we saw coming. People were dreamers. People were dreamers from the very beginning. I think it's in our human psyche to dream bigger, to want something bigger. If you don't mind, I had some, like, I was doing a little reading on the subject, and I found some fascinating stuff, like cultures, in the 4th and 5th century before, BC, before Christ, were writing and telling these stories about things that would be floating above Earth, and launching these, chariots or whatever they thought, at the time, into a different world. And, people have been talking about the future and dreaming bigger. And I feel like that's something that sci-fi means to me, is pretty much putting your beliefs of something bigger than yourself and manifesting it, whether it be through technology, through time travel, through being in touch with life outside of this world. There's so many things. I don't know if you have anything else to add to that before I keep going.
I love the way you just said that. I think that that really is very poignant. The only thing I really wanted to add was I being in film school, it was really awesome to kind of see the origin of film. And I think you said you've seen this movie, Ray, but the film Hugo from Martin Scorsese that looks at the history of film, and you kind of get a brief look into Georges Méliès, who was one of the earliest filmmakers starting around the early 1900s, late 1800s, and his film A Voyage to the Moon, which is like one of the earliest recollected science fiction-esque films, where you literally have these people traveling to space and the creatures that they encountered while they were there. And just looking at that from a period that early, where I could imagine, being a person going to the theater in the early 1900s and seeing this and just being in awe of another person's ideas or perspectives on the otherworldly and seeing something through a different perspective. And I think it's just such a beautiful genre. I think a lot of people really think that it's just like, oh, it's aliens or whatever. Almost every science fiction film I've ever watched has this really beautiful messages to them that are so connective and so much about advancing the world, or cautionary tales about negative things that could happen to the world. And I'm really excited to get into these lists because I feel like you're going to have some stuff that's going to really excite me, and I hope that I have some stuff that's going to excite you as well.
So I'll go first. I'm going to get this one out of the way because, well, it's kind of the more quote-unquote mainstream one in my pick. Film that, it's one of those films from back in the day, over 30 years ago, that stars a little known actor called Harrison Ford. He came back for it later when the franchise was revived. And of course, you know what I'm going to say. And what I'm going to say, it's Blade Runner.
That's an exciting pick. It's funny you picked Blade Runner. This is a film that I have only seen once. It was a very long time ago. And I still have not seen 2049. So I'll be very interested to hear your take and opinion on this one.
So it's interesting because I'm going to focus a little bit more on 2049 because I know I'm about to commit film travesty, but I like 2049 better.
I've heard a lot of people say that they like 2049 better. And I'm not surprised because from what I remember about the original Blade Runner, which, like I said, I think I was like 18 or 19 when I watched it, the set design and the cinematography is beautiful, but I remember there being a lot of slower moments. And from what I've heard of 2049 is that it's much more fast-paced, in-your-face, and Denis Villeneuve-style filmmaking.
Right, I think Denis Villeneuve just took it to a whole new length. Don't get me wrong, I really like Blade Runner. I really enjoyed it. I think it's an incredible tale of like this futuristic, cyberpunk world. It's all disheveled and it looks gross and it's always raining. And Harrison Ford is great. I mean, I love Harrison Ford in this movie and everything that man does. Really, I really like him. But the world that Ridley Scott created when he adapted that movie from Philip K. Dick's novel, which it's an interesting novel. This is a little bit of a spoiler if you haven't read the book, but Denis Villeneuve did something really interesting because Ridley Scott switched the book a lot. He switched, the source material a lot to adapt it. But the opening scene in Blade Runner 2049 is basically the opening part of the book. So Denis Villeneuve took the opening of the book and adapted it to the opening scene of 2049, which I thought was great. When 2049 came around, the reason why I hold this movie in such high regard for me is going through, as you normally are, you're going through some life-changing stuff in your life. And I remember I was really into film, and then I kind of got disconnected for a little bit. I was just kind of disillusioned and preoccupied with other things. And then I saw the trailer for 2049, and I was like, what in the world is this? It took me, just seeing the trailer, that beautiful scene when Ryan Gosling is walking through the Vegas landscaping. It's all red. Denis Villeneuve was really good about being super secretive about this film, to the point where you have a name given to you on the trailer, but then when you watch the movie, you realize he switched the name on the trailer just to not give away a plot point. I absolutely adore that he did that. So when I saw the trailer, I ran home and I watched Blade Runner because I hadn't seen it. And I was like, this is great. I loved it. It was great. And then I went and saw Blade Runner 2049, got home, got up the next morning and went back to the theaters to see it again, because Blade Runner 2049 is what took me from being just like a casual moviegoer to what I am now. Like, that movie just changed the way I view film. It was immersive. The world did not matter. I was so caught in this cyberpunk world, and Ryan Gosling was amazing. Ana de Armas was amazing. Harrison Ford was amazing. Everything about this movie was incredible. And I know I'm being super vague, but if you haven't seen it, I am of the mindset that it's best to not know anything going in. Even Dave Bautista, who was there for like literally like 10 minutes, was incredible.
And I've heard that about this movie, and I know that people that love it, they really love it. And it seems like something that'd be right up my alley. I'm not sure why I haven't got around to watching 2049 yet. I plan on, when I see it, watching the original Blade Runner and 2049 back to back, because like I said, I was really young when I saw Blade Runner the first time, and I feel like my appreciation for film wasn't there yet, and so I feel like now it's one of those that I've constantly been like, yeah, I love Ridley Scott. I really want a chance to see this, but I've never really kind of set aside the time to do that, so I'm going to do that very soon.
You do, especially because we're going to, and I'm throwing this out there, we don't have to do it now, but we're going to do a Denis Villeneuve ranking, so you have to see it.
My first pick is one that I have spoken on the podcast before, speaking of practical effects, and Ray, I'm sure this will bring a smile to your face, but I'm going to talk about Psycho Goreman. I love Psycho Goreman. I don't think I stressed it enough on the episode that I mentioned it as an answer to one of our questions, but I am obsessed with this movie. I think that this movie is 80s camp to like the next level for like the modern age, and I think this is a perfect blend of sci-fi and horror. Obviously, I've talked about it a lot in length, so I won't go too heavily into the details, but on a simplified level, you have this young girl, Mimi, and her brother, who she is kind of this like eccentric, over-the-top child who thinks that she's the best at everything. She's kind of like an asshole, and she is like one of my favorite characters in a movie. And her and her brother are in their backyard playing this game, and they uncover this like, I don't know, like almost coffin type thing, and they end up opening it up and unleashing Psycho Goreman, this alien creature from another planet who is almost like a god because of this gem that he has, that Mimi gets the gem. She has the ability to control him, and it's just these kids goofing off with this giant murderous alien monster, and the ramifications of that and what happens to the people around them. And I just love everything about this movie. It is hilarious. I talked about it a little bit on that podcast before, how funny it is and how ridiculous it is, but I don't want to go this episode without talking about how deep of a lore they create in this world about these alien races, and about this, like, obviously it's very much those angel-like creatures. I feel like are a very large commentary on the church, and possibly even looking as far back as the Crusades, of these people who are going in and like taking over and instilling their religion into people's minds and forcing these groups of people to either comply or die. And Psycho Goreman was enslaved by these people and managed to escape, and his whole like life's mission is to destroy them and to destroy every planet. And I think when you look at a filmmaker like Steven Kostanski, who could have just made this really dumb, schlocky thing where alien comes and interacts with these kids, and it's more just about their relationship, but I love that he never sacrifices this world that he's created and these really incredible looking outfits that are all practical. There's virtually no CGI CGI in this film. Almost everything is done practically, which I have a lot of respect for filmmakers now who continue to use practical effects. But like that sequence, Ray, where they're all sitting at that table, and all the different alien races are sitting at the table and talking with each other. I think it really adds another layer to this world and just makes it even more immersive. And then obviously the group of his quote unquote friends who come back after him when he sends that distress message gives you even more of an immersive look into the different types of creatures that exist in this world. And I just think it's a brilliant movie. I think it does a really great job of having that absurdist sci-fi lore mixed in with this really cute kind of family drama about this brother and sister who are kind of always butting heads, and this really inept father and his wife who puts up with a lot of shit. The dad in this movie is one of my favorite characters. I love the scene, Ray, where he's like, I made dinner for everybody, and she's like, you microwaved a chicken breast. There are so many great moments in this movie, and it's just something that really means a lot to me, and I think that it really does a great job of combining that science fiction world with horror, and I thought that it would be a great way to start this list off. I don't know if you have anything you want to say about Psycho Goreman, Ray.
You know, I remember looking at like just lists, because when I was putting together my list, I was looking at so many options. And I just remember thinking, hey, Psycho Goreman would be fun. And then I was like, I'm not going to steal this thunder from Nate.
You knew that it was going to come up on my list, didn't you?
Oh, 100%. But I think what I like about Psycho Goreman, and I'm glad you brought this one up, because I unfortunately don't have a lot of creature picks for me. So I'm glad that you brought in a creature pick, because I feel like, you know, creature movies, however you may want to look at it, whether it would be Alien or The Thing or Godzilla or Psycho Goreman, like they add such levity to a genre that's really heavy, and to be able to use these like ridiculous little tropes, like this guy that wants to destroy a world but a little girl is controlling him, like things like that seem ridiculous. So it's so nice to have movies like this, especially when they are so good at blending that whole vibe of horror with, you know, I would even argue some body horror thrown in there. I am really excited for these filmmakers. You have to see The Void, because if you like Psycho Goreman so much, you have to see The Void.
Oh, I know. I've heard so many great things about The Void, and it's on my list of things to watch, and I haven't seen it yet, but I will get around to it. Psycho Goreman, it's not only one of my favorite sci-fi films, it's just one of my favorite movies ever. It's like to me, it's just like that perfect blend of all the reasons why I love horror and sci-fi as genres, because you can do so much. And like you said about that brevity, this movie has some really violent moments, but it also has some really comedic moments. And I love the continuing joke about the warrior's death and just how disgusting that is done, but in a practical way that looks amazing.
Sci-fi can take so many forms. It's very Lovecraftian in its own right. That you can, it takes whatever form you give it, and sometimes sci-fi takes the form of a demon that wants to destroy universes.
Yes, absolutely. Oh my God, I love this movie so much. So I could go on about Psycho Goreman all day, but I will move it on. Ray, go ahead and hit me with your next pick.
So I usually try to like piggyback off of what you have for my pick, so like kind of try to stay on the same wavelength. I'm going to go for lighthearted. I'm going to stay lighthearted right now. This movie came out actually last year. It was one of my favorite movies from last year. This movie incorporates some of my favorite things in the world. Just not in movies, just favorite things in the world. It incorporates cute animals. It incorporates sentient robots. It incorporates Tom Hanks. And the movie I'm talking about is an Apple TV original called Finch.
I saw the trailer for this movie, but I have not seen it. So I love Tom Hanks, so I will be very interested to hear what you have to say about this one.
This movie had me crying like a child, because there are things that I love in this world. Sentient robots and animals. And then those bastards went and put both of them in one movie. The premise of this movie is it's really simple. Basically, Tom Hanks, he's an older gentleman who he is getting old. They live in this post-apocalyptic world where basically the ozone layer is basically gone, and so the sun can burn you. It can just fry you. So they can't go outside, just dress normal because the sun can burn your skin off. So Tom Hanks goes around and he scavenges anything that he can find, but he's also a scientist, and he has this dog, this adorable dog, who it's, for all of you out there who are animal lovers, especially if you have dogs, like those furry creatures are your whole world. I know it is with mine. My dogs are like my best friends. I watched this movie and then I was like, where is this going to go? And then you find out that Tom Hanks, he is dying. He's going to die. But he doesn't want to leave his dog alone in the world, especially with how things are. So he builds a robot and gives the robot, the ability to bond with the dog. So the whole movie is Tom Hanks, this adventure movie, as they're trying to travel to the West Coast, because apparently on the West Coast the heat and all of the issues happening isn't as bad, so there's better chances of survival on the West Coast. So they're heading towards the West Coast, obviously dealing with different adventures, but at the same time Tom Hanks is trying to train this robot and this dog to bond, and that had me just melting with emotions.
That sounds like a very intense story and sounds like something that I would really enjoy. This is one that I'm definitely going to have to add onto my list. I'm sure it will probably hit me just as hard as it hit you.
I was crying like a little kid, but just being able to like I said, I love when they put a robot that's like has feelings and emotions. So like, for example, I love WALL-E, Batteries Not Included, Iron Giant, all these robots that show emotions. That's always really connected with me for some reason. And then I love animals. I have 2 dogs that are my world. So seeing these 2 things come together, and you feel for the guy. Like if I were to find out, heaven forbid, that I have some terminal disease, the first thing that's going to come to mind is what happens to my dogs. So seeing that come to fruition, it is so emotional for me. It had such an emotional impact. I thought it was just going to be like a fun popcorn movie, and I'm like sobbing by the end of this thing.
That sounds so good. I definitely want to check this movie out. I'm sure that I would enjoy it just as much as you did.
Yep, so that's my pick. Go watch it. Go watch this movie. Just get a freaking pay for a month of Apple TV and just go watch that.
We spoke about the master at the beginning of the episode, Mr. David Cronenberg. So why don't we talk about his son, and let's get into talking about Possessor.
Yes!
Yeah.
Oh my gosh. So So for those listening, Nate and I were having a conversation earlier where we were talking about narrowing this list down. I have to share the story. And then I was like, Nate, I am having a hard time narrowing this list down. There is a few that I hope you pick because I want to bring up, but I also want to bring other movies up, so I'm keeping a backup list in case you don't bring it up, and Possessor was on that backup list, so I'm so happy you're bringing it up.
Yes, I absolutely loved Possessor. It obviously came out during COVID, and it was like a streaming film, and I didn't know anything about it other than that it was David Cronenberg's son, and obviously being someone who loves David Cronenberg, I was very excited to see it, and this film blew away my every expectation. So to give a brief description of the film, you have our lead character played by Andrea Riseborough. Her name is Tasia Voss, who works for this corporation who has her use this machine where she can possess a person, essentially, and she can take over the person to commit these assassinations. And it's really fascinating. They show the process into how they do it, and there's all this work that goes into it. And at the end, she returns her to her own body by forcing the person to kill themselves, which I thought was really interesting. And so the plot of this movie is the organization wants her to take over Christopher Abbott's body, who works for this person who is played by Sean Bean. What they're doing is they're trying to have him infiltrate in there to kill Sean Bean's character. And so the movie is Andrea Riseborough's character takes over Christopher Abbott's body and has to keep his relationship alive and do all of this stuff to kind of keep the forefront of his lifestyle normal so that she can execute this, but it's also like an internal struggle for Andrea Riseborough's character as to like, what is this process doing on her own brain? Why did she choose to join this group of people? And really, it's just this incredibly fascinating character study that also examines some really interesting ideas and subject matter on, like, there's even times where like sexuality is brought into question, being how this woman is inhabiting this man's body and like her looking at the sexual experiences with this other person through a very different lens. And on top of that, you just have this really great sci-fi premise. The third act of this movie, which I don't really want to get into any spoilers because this is a movie that like you just need to watch, is just so mind-blowing and surreal. The filmmaking in this is like another level of insane, of just like gorgeous visuals. The scene with the mask, Ray, is like one of my favorite scenes in recent memory of any film. It just looks so beautiful, and like the way Cronenberg was able to capture all this information is amazing, and it just takes you to another world. I read about this recently where apparently this is like an alternative version of 2008, which I thought was a really fascinating way to portray the movie in this very specific time period. But it's just a great performance-driven film. It has some really amazing visuals, and it's the perfect like science fiction where it's looking less into the extraterrestrial and more into the advances in technology and how that can be a good or a bad thing. And what I also find really interesting is when we look at what Christopher Abbott does for work, and when it kind of dives into what his job is, and I thought that was such like a large commentary on our society as a whole. And this movie is just great. I love it, and I could talk about it for forever, but I'm excited to hear what you have to say about it, Ray.
I think you've said it all. I love that. What I love about this movie a lot, too, is that, like, on the surface, it just looks like your gory, violent movie. But this is one of the prime examples where sci-fi doesn't have to be this, like, futuristic, cyberpunk, space world. This could look just like your everyday world, but the technology behind it and the cerebral aspect of it, and the thought that has been put into the cerebral aspect of the movie. There is no time machines. There is no flying saucers. It's just very much a movie that it feels like it could just be happening right now, you know, in this moment in time. But because of the concept of it and the, you know, ideology behind it, it takes the sci-fi and it gives this very refined look at a sci-fi, you know, at a futuristic sci-fi world where things can still look the same as our, you know, everyday world, but it transcends that because there's this world, this technology out there that is causing such insanity. Also, thank you, I get to redeem myself, Jim Williams, who I accidentally called on a earlier episode for John Williams. Jim Williams scored a very moody, ambient score for this movie that just adds a layer to this film that takes it to another level.
We've kind of covered it all. Possessor is one of those movies that I feel like probably in the next, 10, 20 years will be considered a science fiction classic. And I'm glad that Brandon Cronenberg is so early into his filmmaking career, because he is just like, he is so incredibly talented. I still haven't seen his 2012 film Antiviral, but I recently watched on the Criterion Channel, he has a short film called Please Speak Continuously and Describe Your Experiences as They Come to You. That is literally the full title. And it is like, you can see all the hallmarks that it's like a 9-minute short film, but you can see all of the hallmarks that will come into Possessor. And Ray, I just wanted to bring this up. Brandon Cronenberg's new film, Infinity Pool, is shooting right now and stars Alexander Skarsgård and Mia Goth.
Oh, that's going to be awesome.
Yep, and the plot description is a rich couple are on vacation in La Tolqua at an all-inclusive resort, but outside the hotel gates lies something more dangerous. So who knows what we will be in for, but I'm excited for it. I will support Brandon Cronenberg in anything that he makes.
Me too. I need to check out his back catalog too, just like you.
So Ray, let's hear that third pick.
For my third pick, I decided to one of my favorite subgenres in movies is space travel. I love space travel. I'm obsessed with space, and I'm obsessed with and there's so many great picks. There was, films like Interstellar, Apollo 13, even more horror oriented like Alien, that's an absolute classic. But ultimately, I thought to myself, everyone has seen Interstellar, everyone knows about Alien, everybody knows about even like First Man, which was incredible. But the one that I ended up going for, it's a little movie by a director called Duncan Jones. It was his directorial debut, and the movie I'm talking about is called Moon.
Okay, do you want to know something funny?
What's that?
Moon was on my list and I trimmed it off.
Oh, yes.
And the only reason why I took Moon off my list is because I have only seen it once. But the one time I saw it, I absolutely loved it. I thought that it was amazing, and it's 100% my jam, where it's like a small scale science fiction film that is executed so brilliantly. So Ray, I'm excited to hear you talk about it because I do love this movie.
What I love about, and I'm so happy that I got trimmed off, because I trimmed off Possessor and you trimmed off Moon, and they ended up on the list.
That's so awesome. Yeah, this was 100% like it just barely made it off my list.
Same thing with Possessor, barely made it off my list. So Moon is a movie that stars Sam Rockwell, who is incredible, by the way. All the love for Sam Rockwell. And basically the movie, like the basic plot of the movie is, Sam Rockwell is, basically he's up in the moon. His name is Sam Bell, is the name of his character. And he basically is, they have these missions on the moon where they go do this like excavations in the moon. They go for 3 years. And after 3 years, they go back home, and then a new person comes and takes over for them. And he's getting ready to go home. He's almost there. He's excited to see his wife and kid. And then his health starts kind of deteriorating there at the end of the 3 years. And one day where he's out on his rover on the lunar surface, he has an accident and he passes out. He wakes up the next day inside of the nursery, basically, and this robot called Gertie is the only companion that they basically have on the ship, wakes him up, and suddenly there is another person there who looks exactly like him except younger, and obviously still played by Sam Rockwell. Sam Rockwell plays both of them, but it looks exactly like Sam Rockwell younger. And then he has to figure out, who is he, why is he there, and they have to figure this out before the company that they work for arrive in a few days. And basically is this kind of like psychological thriller almost of him trying to figure out who this clone looking guy, this replica looking guy is, why he is there, and why his health is suddenly deteriorating.
I remember watching this the first time, and it was off of someone's recommendation, and I had no idea what I was getting into. And I was just completely enamored with this movie because I feel like the way that it's paced and the way information is revealed to you, where, like, I'm not going to get into any spoilers, but this movie has some pretty crazy plot twists throughout it.
That's why I try to be so vague right now in the description.
It's just so nuanced and incredibly directed. And I don't know what else Duncan Jones has done, but like, I absolutely adored this film. He made Source Code. I just had to look it up. And then he did the World of Warcraft movie. Weird.
Well, and then he did, I haven't seen this movie, but Duncan Jones also did a movie it came out on Netflix, called Mute, which I guess Mute is like a spiritual sequel to Moon, which I haven't seen.
Oh, that's the Paul Rudd, Alexander Skarsgård movie, right?
Yeah, I haven't seen it, but I heard that it's like loosely connected to Moon.
I think the thing I love about this, and I don't think it's talked about enough, Sam Rockwell is a brilliant actor. I think that everything that he shows up in, he's just absolutely incredible, and this movie is no exception. And obviously, he has become an incredibly problematic human now, but Kevin Spacey's vocal performance of Gertie in this is very reminiscent of the voice in 2001: A Space Odyssey.
Yes.
It's very haunting, very inviting in a way, but also ominous enough to where you're kind of just like, holy shit, what is what is Gertie doing? I feel like for such a small scale cast, they all give really incredible performances. And by the end of this film, I was just like, holy shit, how is this going to end? Exceed your expectations into how this film could finish. And oh my God, Ray, I'm so glad you put this on your list because I really wanted to talk about it and it just barely got pushed off.
Also, just like a quick little fun fact, Duncan Jones is the son of late David Bowie.
Is he seriously? I had no idea.
Yeah, that's David Bowie's son.
That is super awesome. I love that little tidbit of information.
So yeah, that's Moon. Moon, like, just go watch it, man. Go watch Moon. This movie is incredible. I can't... Also, once again, Clint Mansell, all the love in the world. This score is incredible. That's all I'm going to say. Go watch Moon.
The score is absolutely amazing. Which, Ray, if you're cool with me transitioning, I'm going to transition into a film that also has a phenomenal score.
Oh.
Are you ready?
I'm so ready. Hit it.
So, it would not be an episode of the Film Monsters podcast if Nate didn't include some sort of pretentious art house film. And I'm going to be discussing Jonathan Glazer's Under the Skin.
You know, Under the Skin was one of those movies from like, I have to include that. And I was like, no, Nate is going to include that.
I love Under the Skin. I feel like this is a movie that if you are not a fan of art house filmmaking, you will absolutely hate it. I know a lot of people who think that this is just like the most boring movie ever made and that nothing... It's one of those films like A24 puts out a lot of times like this and A Ghost Story, and there's a lot of movies where people are like, there's nothing happens in that movie, but so much happens in this fucking movie. I don't know what you're talking about. So simply, on the surface, this film is Scarlett Johansson is a extraterrestrial entity, as we are implied through this amazing intro sequence. Like, Ray, I know with your love of sci-fi, the opening to this film is like one of the most beautiful things I've ever seen. Just in film. The whole like construction of Scarlett Johansson's character and like the eyeball and like listening to her recite the alphabet and all these little things of like how she's being built. Then you're dropped into this world where there's this man who rides a motorcycle, who's this ominous being who you're implied that he is a part of this alien group of people, and he goes in the middle of like nowhere and grabs this body and picks it up and puts it in a van and drives off to this place. And then you see Scarlett Johansson standing naked in this all white room. She takes all the clothes off of this woman. She gets in this van and she starts driving around in the middle of the UK, picking up these men, taking them to this room, getting naked, and these men kind of just go into this black void into the floor. And that is the film. And it's a really fascinating movie about, you know, you can look at it on the surface level of like an alien's perspective to human beings. What's really interesting is like the beginning of this film where Scarlett Johansson's character has no empathy. She does not care about anything. That scene on the beach, Ray, still haunts me to this day. I every time I watch this movie, I'm like, I know it's coming. It hits me every single time, but she is so devoid of any kind of empathy or compassion towards human beings. And that starts to shift throughout the film. And that's what I love so much about this is like, if an alien species came to our planet, would they shift? Would their perspective of people change? And there's one specific interaction in particular with that man who has the very deformed face. And that kind of shifts her perspective entirely. And there's also a much larger commentary on the political scheme of where this film is taking place, about the view of women as a whole and how women are sexualized, the view of women who work as sex workers. There's so many like underlying themes that occur in this film. But on the surface, it's just a really immersive and incredible sci-fi film. Puts you in the bird's eye view of the alien species and how they would perceive our society. I love that scene, and I think it's so amazing. And it's so simple where she goes to the restaurant and tries to eat the piece of cake. There's just something so incredible about like cake being this really like luxurious and exciting thing for people that she wants to experience, and she ends up like vomiting it up. And like just trying to experience the world through the eyes of a normal person. And it's a film that I think I've seen it 4 or 5 times now, and every time I watch it, I get more out of it. And I think once you get past, this is a film that requires multiple viewings, because when you watch it the first time, you're just going to kind of try to be surface level, taking in what the story is. And then every time after that, you can pick up on all the other subtle nuances that occur. And I feel like this last time I watched it, which I've been doing my A24 series on my YouTube channel, this time I watched it, I feel like was the most fulfilled I was by the film as a whole. And I was able to kind of piece together all of my thought processes that I've had on the film before. And this is a movie I could do an entire episode on. I just want to finish by saying Scarlett Johansson's performance is brilliant. She is absolutely incredible in this movie for how nuanced she has to be. And the Micah Levy score is haunting. It's gorgeous. And I'm so glad it's getting repressed because I pre-ordered it and I'm so excited to have this on vinyl.
Yeah, I really can't add more to it than... Yeah, it's an incredible movie. I feel like this movie also succeeded at conveying the message, older movies like Species were trying to do. I actually read somewhere, and correct me if I'm wrong, but a lot of those performances when he picks up men, like, those aren't actors.
Yes, exactly. So when Jonathan Glazer made this movie, he wanted to make it feel as realistic as possible. So a lot of the people who are walking up to the car are just regular people, and they're hidden cameras. And then a lot of the cast in the film who was actually casted, they were chosen from applicants who had no acting experience. It's meant to feel very much slice of life, and I think that it really is. I really love that scene where she pulls up outside of that club, and she's standing outside, and she's surrounded by all those girls who end up dragging her into that club with her. There's so many like naturalistic sequences in this, but I don't want to take away from the fact that the science fiction elements in this film are shot gorgeously. That like ethereal space that most of the film takes place in, which Stranger Things ripped off, it's amazing. And then when you kind of get more of an insight into what's happening to these men, it's like, it's jarring. It's very disturbing.
I agree. This movie, it's very cold, too. It's a very cold movie. It definitely requires for you to go in knowing that you're going to watch a very cold, very dark, very ominous type movie.
That last scene in the woods, Ray, with the truck driver, holy shit. Every time I watch it, it's such an interesting commentary on society and human beings. And I think it shows... There are elements that really show the beauty of human nature, and there's also elements that show the horror and the tragedy that is human beings. And one of my favorite characters is the man at the bus stop who ends up helping her for a while. I think that really shows the beautiful, compassionate nature of human beings. And then, like, the complete 360 opposite of that in the third act with that truck driver in the woods. And yeah, this movie is brilliant. I'm sure Ray and I could have done an entire episode just talking about this movie, but I won't continue to drivel on about Under the Skin. So Ray, hit me with your number 2 pick. I'm ready.
My number 2 pick, we got to bring this back up a little bit, give it some flavor, Not everything is dark and dreary out there.
No, not everything's dark and dreary.
Which is why I'm going to pick the cyberpunk action revenge film, Upgrade.
Oh, Upgrade has been on my list to watch for so long, and I still haven't seen it, and I've heard it's amazing, so hit me with it. Give me your opinion. I'm excited to hear all about it.
So Upgrade was directed by Lee Whannell. Stars Logan Marshall Green from the Invitation that we discussed some time ago. This movie's great. So basically the premise is this man who, they live in a futuristic world. Everything, self-driving cars, a kitchen that cooks for you, this futuristic world. He basically is kind of stuck in the past. He likes his cars. He even says that he likes the car that he can drive. And his wife is like some big wig in this big like corporation, like cyber, like, robotic corporation. And he goes to drop off a car that he's restoring for this scientist guy that runs another corporation. And when they're returning from that, they get in a car wreck. Somebody basically hacks into their car, and they have a car wreck, and this group of people come, and they basically kill his wife in cold blood, and then they think they kill him, but they shoot him on his spine, and he becomes a paraplegic. So when this happens, the guy that he sold the car to earlier in the movie figures out what happens and tells him, listen, I've been working on this project. It's a secret project, but it's this little chip that I would install surgically in your spine that will give you the ability to walk and move again. And then he signs up for it. But he's so entangled by grief and anger over the murder of his wife. Because the scientist tells him, you cannot let people know that you can walk and move. You have to, because this isn't technically legal what we're doing. So when he realizes he can walk, he starts investigating the murder of his wife. And when he figures out what's happening, as he confronts one of the guys, the chip has a voice in his head that tells him, hey, do this, do that. He's like, you need to fight back. And he's like, I can't fight. And he's like, well, do you consent to me taking over? And he gives consent to this chip, and then he becomes this brutal killing machine. And from then on, it becomes this, like, he's just out for revenge. Meanwhile, the other scientist guy is monitoring him, so he tries to shut him down so he can't walk. And it's this just like action thriller of him trying to take down these people that killed his wife while having this like implant in his body that turns him into this absolutely vicious killer.
That sounds like such a cool premise to a film. I guarantee you I will love this movie.
You will. It is totally up your alley. It's, it's a very like cyberpunk Blade Runner-esque type world where everything is dirty and grimy. A lot of neons, and it's just, and then the science behind it, and then the future concepts of it, and oh no, it's incredible, man. You have to watch it. Again, another movie. I feel like this is a trending, a trending theme here, that like all these sci-fi movies have incredible scores, because so does this one.
Yes, and what excites me the most about it is that you said Leigh Whannell, who is someone I really like and appreciate a lot.
He directed it. I believe this is... Oh, no, that's not... That's his second movie. He directed Insidious 3, and then he went to Upgrade. This next one, And then from Upgrade, he went on and directed The Invisible Man. So he's got a good track record.
He really does. I was actually listening to a podcast recently that Lynn Shay was on from the Insidious series, and she talked about Leigh Whannell and said that he is like truly just one of the most wonderful human beings in the world, and you can kind of just see his impact on the horror community, and he seems just like a really great guy.
So that's all I gotta say about Upgrade. Go watch it, please. Like, you go watch it for sure, but just everyone out there, go watch it. This was one of those indie darlings that nobody saw, and it's incredible.
Yeah, and I think it's a Blumhouse produced movie, if I'm correct.
Yes, it is.
So, yeah, I'm definitely going to add that onto my list. And my next pick, Ray, I think is going to be very surprising to you. This pick continues on a trend where I will say classifying this as a science fiction movie is what Ray and I talked about, how sci-fi covers a scope of different things and different elements and not just the extraterrestrial and whatnot, similar to what you talk about with Upgrade and the technology element. And continuing on my Scarlett Johansson phase, I'm going to talk about the 2013 Spike Jonze film, Her.
I have not seen this movie.
Are you fucking serious?
Yes. I know. You're
Mr. Joaquin Phoenix fan. Ray, this is legitimately one of my favorite Joaquin Phoenix movies. And
you know what's funny about it? I have started this movie several times, and something happens. I haven't even gotten through like the opening credits. I'm like, okay, I'm gonna start it, and I'll hit play, and like I'll get a phone call, or I'll realize I have to go do something. So this is that movie that it's cursed. I keep trying to watch it. Something always happens.
So it's really funny. This was actually a film that I almost included on our music episode, but I felt like, I don't know, this was one where the music plays a really intricate role into the film, but I was like, I don't know if it works. And then I was like, you know what? We're doing a sci-fi episode, and this is the perfect example of science fiction in a way that could eventually happen in our society. So you have Joaquin Phoenix's character, Theodore Twombly, who's this really introverted, kind of depressed guy who writes these letters for people who are unable to write personal letters for their loved ones. And this is a society that has hit almost a completely digital age. No one is really handwriting anymore, which is very close to ours. But the cinematography and the set design and the way that Spike Jonze approaches this feels very in the future, but a near enough future that it's comprehensible. He is about to get divorced from his childhood sweetheart, played by Rooney Mara, and he goes and purchases a new OS for his phone. Literally, it's designed to adapt and evolve to you as a person, and the voice is played by Scarlett Johansson. So instead of just having like a Siri or something where you ask questions to, this AI asks you questions, and it's designed to grow psychologically. And it's really fascinating because it takes an interest in Theodore's life and wants to push him where Rooney Mara didn't really understand why Joaquin Phoenix wanted to continue this writing career, or why he cared about doing this for other people. And Samantha, which is the name of the operating system, convinces him how important his writing is and wants to learn about how he operates. And what everybody says about this movie, a man falls in love with his phone, but it's so much deeper than that. They start off by having like almost like a verbal sexual encounter, and then it gets to the point where there's a scene in the film, Samantha wants him to be able to experience what sex with her would be like if she was a real autonomous being. She hires a prostitute to come and be like a sexual surrogate. And it really becomes this weird, uncomfortable situation for Theodore because he can't put Samantha's character into this person. And so it's really this larger conversation about, should AI be able to become this complex and developed to where people could form a deeper, more intimate relationship with an artificial intelligence being? And Joaquin Phoenix's performance is brilliant. The use of music in this, there's a scene where he plays ukulele and sings this Arcade Fire song with Scarlett Johansson, and it is just absolutely incredible. The score to this film overall is done by Arcade Fire. I just got the vinyl recently. They just put it out like a little over a year ago, and it's beautiful. But this movie is all about human relationship and about connection and about dealing with depression and looking at yourself through a very specific lens. And you want to talk about a movie that, you know, will destroy you but also make you feel amazing at the end of it and make you feel optimistic. This is the movie for you. This movie has a ton of like crazy cameos in this movie. Rooney Mara is in it, obviously. Amy Adams becomes a really big character. Olivia Wilde shows up as like a blind date that Joaquin Phoenix goes on, and a very young Chris Pratt shows up in this movie. Bill Hader does a voice in this. Kristen Wiig does a voice in this movie. It's just, it has such a star-studded cast that all gives really amazing performances, but it's just this really heartwarming and beautiful film that really kind of, every time I think about it, it puts me in an amazing place. And it's one of my favorite movies of all time, and I would be remiss if I didn't bring it up on this podcast for a science fiction episode. And I think it's just proof that sci-fi can be so much more than just like an alien species or like something extraterrestrial.
It's so interesting as you describe that relationship between Scarlett Johansson and Joaquin Phoenix. That is a very, very similar relationship as Ana de Armas and Ryan Gosling in Blade Runner 2049. Very similar. Yeah, it's very like a very similar thing, because Ana de Armas in Blade Runner 2049 plays a holographic companion to Ryan Gosling.
That's crazy. It was interesting to me when this movie came out in 2013 and everybody was like, oh, that's the movie where the guy has sex with the cell phone. And I'm like, it's so much more complex than that. And Spike Jonze is such a brilliant filmmaker, and it's just incredible. It is one of the best movies ever made.
Well, and I think there's something to be said also about this, because back in 2013, people thought that was silly. But if you think about now, like, you know, we put so much value on things like social media and how people are interacting with our, you know, character, so to speak, because no one is truly 100% themselves online. So, you know, we are putting so much investment on how the world perceives us. You know, you even have things on like Instagram, like people actually dealing with depression because they're not getting enough likes or enough follows. You know, you even have companies developing quote unquote virtual girlfriend apps for your phones. So it's like, we're not that far off of that. Like, that movie was really trying to tell us what was coming.
Exactly. And I think what's funny is looking at Spike Jonze's career. I mean, you look, he directed this, he directed Where the Wild Things Are, adaptation, Being John Malkovich. He even was a producer on Charlie Kaufman's Synecdoche, New York. But what people don't often know about Spike Jonze is he has writing credits on every Jackass movie.
What? No.
He has literally written skits and segments for every single Jackass movie and has been a producer on every Jackass movie, including the Bad Grandpa film.
That's incredible.
Just incredible. And Her is a movie I could talk about for a year. But just watch it, Ray. You'll love it. I know you will, 100%. So I'm ready for your number one, Ray. This is exciting. I can't wait to hear your number one.
My number one pick. This is a movie that I consider... I'm going to sound so, like, overhyping this. I consider this movie underrated, unsung, and imperfect masterpiece.
Ooh, I cannot wait. Hit me with it.
This movie is one of those movies that somebody recommended to me casually. I watched it and I was blown away. This movie seems to get a lot of hate too. Like, a lot of people seem to critique this movie and say how flawed it is. But I think all those flaws is what elevates this movie to another level. This movie was written by Alex Garland and it was directed by Danny Boyle. And I'm talking about 2007's Sunshine.
Sunshine, a movie you have mentioned to me multiple times now that I still haven't seen. And I did not know Alex Garland worked on it. That makes me even more excited to watch it. But I know Cillian Murphy's in it, and I love Cillian Murphy. And isn't a young Chris Evans and Michelle Yeoh is in this movie, if I remember correctly.
Yep, you have Cillian Murphy, Chris Evans, Michelle Yeoh, Benedict Wong.
Rose Byrne's in it too.
Yeah, it's an ensemble cast for sure.
I've actually heard a lot of people say the same thing as you, where this is almost like a misunderstood masterpiece. And it's one that has been on my list to watch for an eternity. I just, for some reason, haven't watched it. So let me know all about it, Ray. I'm excited to hear your perspective.
So the basic premise of this movie is in the year 2057, so pretty soon actually, the sun is dying. The sun is just dying. It's shutting off, which means planet Earth is starting to die because of it, because they don't have sunshine. So this group of astronauts basically fly out to the sun to drop a payload, like this bomb, to basically reignite the sun. Their goal is to reignite the sun. And there are so many, like... That's the basic premise. But all of these different characters, you know, have conflicting personalities, obviously. And a lot of it talks about, like, their relationship with, like, there's religious symbolism, there is very, like, science versus religion, God versus man, push and pull. It never takes a side. I personally don't believe it takes a side. It lets the viewer decide for itself. But there is, the cinematography is, especially for a 2007 space movie, the cinematography is absolutely gorgeous. The performances are incredible. Cillian Murphy, why isn't that man bigger than he is? He is insanely talented. A young Chris Evans, you know, this is I think this is just a little bit after Not Another Teen Movie. Like, he's young in this one, but the movie's a misunderstood masterpiece. I personally, I understand its flaws. I've heard people's complaints. I understand where they're coming from, but it doesn't take away from the fact that I think this movie is an absolute must-watch for anybody. The only complaint that I could see people having is the jarring. I'm talking about the jarring shift in mood on the third act. But I wasn't bothered by it.
Whenever a film has like a really jarring shift, but you know, that seems... Danny Boyle has a pretty prolific career and has made some very different films. And Alex Garland traditionally has made some really, you know, like look at Men recently, some controversial films that have some pretty tonally drastic shifts in them. So that's not surprising to me, but I have heard what you're saying. I've heard that it is such a great film with beautiful cinematography, and this is one that I'm going to push to the front of watching very soon. So my number one pick, believe it or not, Ray, I'm going to go basic bitch. I had to do this because this is legitimately my favorite science fiction film ever made, and it's probably one of my favorite movies ever made of all time. And the film I'm going to discuss with Ray, which I know you'll laugh at me as soon as I say it, is John Carpenter's The Thing.
Yes, I'm excited that you brought it up because I didn't bring it up because I was like, I'm not going to be that basic.
I had to do it. I had to be basic bitch because I legitimately think, and no matter what anyone says, I think that, there's a lot of times where Ray and I will love movies and we'll talk about it in detail and say, oh my God, we love these movies. We enjoy them. This is a perfect movie. I don't think that anyone can say that this movie is not perfect. I think tonally, I think the pacing is perfect. I think the performances are perfect. And I think it's John Carpenter's masterpiece. I know a lot of people love Big Trouble in Little China. They love Halloween. This is my favorite John Carpenter film. I think that it encapsulates everything I love about horror, but it also encapsulates everything I love about science fiction. So most people know about The Thing. I'm not going to go into really great detail. It's based off of a book called Who Goes There from John Campbell, and this is a remake of an older film that is really cheesy, that has horrible visual effects. It's not really a great movie, but this movie is perfect, and it's a film about this group of guys who go to Antarctica, and they get there and they're stationed in the middle of nowhere, and this entity comes into play, which you're kind of trying to decipher, okay, what is this? What is it doing? What is it doing to people? And unfortunately, with Ray and I's love of animals, the first things to be infected are dogs, these beautiful dogs. It's really upsetting when I think about it. And what you find out is that this can be transferred from person to person. And we get to a point where we know that it can disguise itself as whatever it wants. And it becomes this very claustrophobic and unsettling story where each one of these people in this base are turning against each other. And there's these tests that they run on each other, these blood tests. And like even those little scenes, Ray, where they're testing the blood, they're so anxiety inducing because you never know who could be infected. And what I love so much about this film, I've seen this movie like 100 times. Every time I watch it, it still provides me the same level of anxiety as the first time I saw it. It's because the pacing in this is perfect. The scarcely used but really amazing Ennio Morricone score, which John Carpenter never uses other people to score his films. The Ennio Morricone score to this movie is amazing. I wish I could have got the Mondo vinyl that they put out. Unfortunately, that thing sold out super quick, and it is turned for a lot of money now. One of my favorite early cinematographers, Dean Cundey, who did work on this, The Howling, the original John Carpenter Halloween. The cinematography in this movie is breathtakingly amazing. And also, I'm a sucker for practical effects. I think practical effects should be used more now. I hate that people stick to CGI for everything because the creature in this film, I don't know what you think, Ray, but a lot of movies I think get dated. You'll watch them and I feel like, even if you look at science fiction movie that I also think is perfect, Ridley Scott's Alien. At the end of the day, the xenomorph alien is a guy in a rubber suit. Some of the shots are really great. They make it look really good. I think the practical effects in this movie are perfect, and I think they're still just as scary and terrifying as they were in 1982.
100%. Something too that they succeeded so well with The Thing. There is this complaint that I've had about horror for a long time, which is how cheap jump scares are. Jump scares are they're cheap. They're used all the time. They're a dime a dozen. They don't work on me 99% of the time. But there's that 1% that works. That's proof that a jump scare can be very effective if done right. And it's that same scene when they're testing the blood. Even though I know it's coming, it still gets me.
But I think that it's warranted as well, because I think the issue with a lot of jump scares now is a jump scare isn't really you viewing anything scary. It's a loud noise. It's a startling thing. It's just, if you're a human being who has perception to things around you, a loud noise will startle you. But what's so great about The Thing is the jump scares in that movie are because the anxiety is already built up. And I think that what makes it so great is the atmosphere and the quiet moments amidst the really fast-paced and brutal moments in this. And I just absolutely love the scene in this where the chest caves in. That scene is another jump scare that gets me every time. And also, I showed my wife this movie for the first time. God, it wasn't too long ago. And it immediately became one of her favorite movies that she's ever watched. And what I love about watching films with a person who's never seen it before is getting their perspective on it and just little things they pick up. And my wife is really great at picking up on little things that I never pay attention to. But Ray, I don't know if you noticed, but inside where they're in the room, when all hell is breaking loose at that one moment, there's a stack of board games in the background. And one of the only titles of the board games that you can see in the background is Stay Alive.
What? No, I had never picked up on that.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Jess looked at me and she goes, hit pause on the movie. And I was like, okay. And she looked over at me and she's like, look at that game. And it literally says Stay Alive. It's like the only board game title that you can read. And just John Carpenter adding little nuances into the film like that. And we would be remiss if we did not talk about the absolutely brilliant fucking performance from Kurt Russell. Holy shit. Kurt Russell obviously did so many incredible things with John Carpenter. Escape from New York, Big Trouble in Little China. He is just an incredible actor, and his performance in this is so amazing. And then also Keith David, who is phenomenal in this, does not get enough credit. His performance is phenomenal. I love this movie, Ray. I could talk about it for the next year and a half. I know it's a basic bitch answer to pick John Carpenter's The Thing, but I had to talk about it because, similar to what you said about Blade Runner, this is one of my favorite movies of all time. I love The Thing. I would continue to praise it, but that is my number one pick. That is Ray and I's top 5 sci-fi recommendations for you all. I had a blast doing this. We're looking forward to continuing on with the sci-fi theme. But before we get into talking about next week's episode, Ray had a new idea for the podcast that we thought would be fun, which is just talking about real quickly some things that we've watched recently. So Ray, do you want to start? What's something that you saw recently that you want to talk about?
Just real quick, I finally finished Lovecraft Country on HBO Max. It was a phenomenal season. I just had a lot of good, I had a fun time watching it. The effects, the way how they translated that Lovecraftian horror vibe, but with like a very socially conscious message, and try to kind of shine the light of like just how awful that Jim Crow era was, but using horror as, using Lovecraft's work, who was notoriously very much a problematic person when it came to race and racism. So being able to use this style of work to kind of promote awareness for the injustices of the Jim Crow era for African Americans, it was brilliant, and I love the season. I'm really sad that it didn't get picked up for a season 2. Incredible score that Waxwork put out too that I was able to pick up. So yeah, just real quick, I just wanted to mention that I really enjoyed Lovecraft Country. It's only 10 episodes. It's literally one season. It ends with enough of a closure that I was happy with. I wish there was more, but I'm happy with how it ended. And yeah, it was fun. It was just a really fun watch, and I'm excited I finally got around to seeing it.
That sounds awesome, and I'm definitely adding it to my list. For me, speaking of Ray talking about Upgrade and Lee Winnell, I just watched the first 7 Saw movies because I'm doing a video for my YouTube channel, and I had watched the first 3 Saw movies in my youth and didn't think very much about them. Now in my adult life, I see them for what they are, which is glorious schlock, some of the dumbest writing I've ever seen, but in the most comical way. I just talked to Ray about it before the podcast started. It's kind of like a daytime soap opera with gore elements, and the 7th movie was one of the dumbest, most fun experiences I've had recently. recently, and I look forward to doing my rank list. I'm not going to make Ray suffer through the Saw movies if he doesn't want to see them, but I will do it on my own time and give myself my own form of torture. Yeah, I want to play a game with myself. So that is what Ray and I have been watching recently. We had a lot of fun talking about that. And so for next week's episode, we thought it would be fun for the next 2 episodes that for the next episode, we're going to watch one of the films that Ray talked about today. And then the following week, we're going to watch one of the films that I talked about today and go into more detail about them. And I have a feeling, Ray, that I know which one you're going to pick. But go ahead and tell everybody which one you're going to pick. It's going to be Sunshine.
Yeah, I'm gonna make you sit your ass down and watch Sunshine.
Yes, I will.
And you're gonna hear me rant about how pissed I am that that's not on vinyl.
Okay, well then to give people a 2-week head start, you're gonna watch Her. And that is going to be what it is. So next week we're going to watch Sunshine, and the following week Ray is going to watch Her, and that is what we're going to do. We're going to meet each other at the midway point, Ray.
I'm scared though. I'm scared that I'm going to try to watch Her. And something's going to happen. My house is going to catch on fire. My dog is suddenly going to turn against me, and then the podcast will be over because that movie's freaking cursed for me.
I'm going to watch Sunshine. You're going to watch Her. We're going to do our best. And that's the episode. We had a lot of fun talking with you guys as we normally do, giving you our sci-fi recommendations. As always, you can follow us on Instagram. We have our main Instagram page at the Film Monsters Podcast. Reach out to us, ask us questions, give us recommendations. We love to hear from you. We want to have that audience interaction. I'm really surprised at some of the numbers of listeners on these recent episodes. So we're getting an audience. We're getting people out there that want to hear from us, and it's awesome. As always, you can follow Ray and I on our personal Instagram pages. You have Ray at Analog C, myself at My Exit Unfair. We post a lot of albums. We post a lot of film-related content. So reach out to us, talk to us, and we look forward to next week's episode. And once again, thank you so much for listening.
And remember that in space, no one can hear you scream.
Goodbye, everyone.